Hello, wizards and muggles. My name is Juan. I am just one reader. Welcome back to my Rereading Harry Potter as an Adult series. Today I will be discussing Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire. Now, a couple of things before we get started with the review. This book was probably the most important book that I read in my childhood and teenage years. It was a key component to my life. I kept my Spanish copy on my bedside table and I would just read it obsessively. I would read it, finish it, and then start again the following morning. I must have read that Spanish copy 15 times. And from the time I became confident with English and reading in English, which must have been at around age 15 or 16, I started reading them in English, and ever since I have read these books in English. So my calculations tell me that I must have read this book around 26, 27 times prior to this reread. So I think it is rather amazing that after having read a book so many times, it is still enjoyable. It is still one of my favorite books, and it still gives me something to talk about. So let's talk about it. What did I see in Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire that I hadn't seen before or that I hadn't really discussed openly before? Well, first of all, it really impressed me just how funny the writing is. J.K. Rowling is a very funny writer. I think we all know that, but I started reading this book sort of expecting it to be full of dread and adventure and suspense, all the qualities that I remembered this book having, and I was just thrown off a little bit by how hilarious it is. It was bloody funny, it was. The characters just had a way of expressing themselves. The dialogue was just stunningly human and hilarious, and I loved it. I loved coming back to this universe and finding everything as delightful as it was. Another thing that I really love about this book and that I loved about this reread is something that is, I think, quite obvious and that a lot of people take for granted, but I still think that it is quite an accomplishment from J.K. Rowling, is that we see the world, the wizarding world, expand and grow like never before. We start to see different aspects and different parts of it. We see the Quidditch World Cup, the Triwizard Tournament. We see different cultures, different schools, different countries and languages, and backstories to these characters. Everything starts to expand. It's lovely. It's wonderful to see how J.K. Rowling planted the seeds of everything that she would later talk about. I also loved how this book became a lot more political and it started to address different issues that we know are later coming into play, such as activism, war, culture, philanthropy, initiative, what it means to be at war, what war can do to people. And, this book is where J.K. Rowling, started to bring everything up. This is the book that really functions as a clear bridge between the first three books, which are more childlike in tone and in theme, and the last three installments, which are very adult in tone and in theme also. This book has that great accomplishment, that great value for me at least, is that it combines perfectly the first three books and the last three books. It takes us from one world to another, from the world of childhood to the world of adulthood. I think I'm not alone when I say that the last three books in the series, Order of the Phoenix, Half-Blood Prince, and Deathly Hallows, have a very distinct tone to them, a very different feel than the rest of the series did. And I think that is because of everything that happens in Goblet of Fire. It's because of the events and the writing and the evolution that these characters have. and the things, the trials that they have to face in Goblet of Fire. I really love that the last chapter of Goblet of Fire is called The Beginning, because it really shows us very explicitly that this is the big turning point for the rest of the series. There is a part at the end of the movie where Hermione has a kind of cheesy line. She says, "Everything's going to change now, isn't it?" And I actually totally agree with her. And even though that line is not exactly in the book, I really love that, because that's exactly what happens. Everything changes. And from here on, it's just adulthood and murder and mystery, and everything that we had seen before is still there, but the themes and the tone just become adult and dark. All right, so now let's talk about some of the characters that I saw under a different light in this reread. First, I think I should mention Ron Weasley, because Ron is a character that I have always liked. I've always enjoyed reading him, but never before had I loved him. This time, I loved Ron Weasley. I really cared about him. He has a very human, interesting progression in this novel. He becomes angry at Harry. He becomes conflicted by his feelings and all the burden that he has to carry, what with being, in the shadow of all the brothers and, all the Weasley family members. There's a lot on his shoulders, and we really get to explore him as a character in this one, maybe more than Hermione. I think Hermione was a character that we explored maybe more in Prisoner of Azkaban, whereas in Goblet of Fire, I have always thought that Ron is a bigger presence than Hermione, or at least that's my tendency to see Ron more prominently in Goblet of Fire than I see Hermione. Also, Ron was hilarious. I had never really cracked up with Ron as much as I did, and I don't know if that is because I'm just more sensitive to his humor now. I don't know if that's something I hadn't spotted in the books. I don't know what it was, but I just adored reading him. He was so hilarious. Now, talking about hilarity, Dumbledore. Man, I love me some Dumbledore. Dumbledore is a character that I also think progressed a lot in this book, because in the first 3 books, Dumbledore was kind of this archetype wizard, Gandalf, if you will. He was this kind of quirky, eccentric take on Gandalf. But in this book, we start to see more layers of his personality, and I think after having read the entire series and of course knowing everything about Dumbledore, his backstory, what he was really doing all along, I think revisiting Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire, I was able to feel a different Dumbledore, but I really loved feeling more layers of Dumbledore. Another character that I really enjoyed was, of course, Hermione, because Hermione is my character. I mean, she has always been my favorite character. She still is and forever will be my favorite character in this universe. And I love how in this book, even though I just said that she's not featured as prominently as Ron, at least in my eyes, I love how in this book Hermione changes and grows. She becomes more active, more involved. She wants to, do something. She also starts to become more fully integrated. She becomes more a whole person, not just a walking stereotype of the bossy, annoying girl, know-it-all who is just there nagging these 2 dudes. No, in here I love how Hermione becomes a real kick-ass female character. She becomes strong and independent, and I just adore her. Another character that I adored was Lord Voldemort, of course. One could argue that Lord Voldemort is the most important character in this books because this is really his story and the story of those who tried to destroy him. And he is equally as important as Harry. And I love that this book is all about him coming back to power. And I love that this book has this amazing, deliciously wicked sense of dread and tension from the very first page until the very last. Everything is leading up to meeting Voldemort and his coming back to power. I also love the character of Snape. I love this character. I love his complexity. But there was one particular scene that I had completely forgotten about. And when I read it, I was just blown away by this man's courage and bravery. There's this scene at the end in the hospital wing where they are trying to convince Cornelius Fudge that Voldemort's back, and he's just denying. And Snape steps up, shows him his dark mark on his arm, and he says, "Look, he's back, look." I loved that moment. Like I said, I had completely forgotten about it, but it tells me a lot about this character, about this man, and everything he had to go through. Hashtag always. Now, there were three characters that I was quite disappointed by, and those were the three school champions, Fleur Delacour, Victor Crumb, and Cedric Diggory. I felt like none of them was really fleshed out. None of them felt like characters to me. They felt more like plot devices or necessary pieces in a puzzle. Fleur Delacour was just the prissy, elegant girl with nothing more to her character, really, nothing more. And I know that we will see more of her in Half-Blood Prince, but in this one, she was just Fleur. Then Victor Crumb was pretty much the same. He was maybe a little bit more fleshed out than Fleur, but, nothing more than just a physical being. And Cedric, I was most disappointed by because I remembered him very fondly. And yes, I was shocked and upset by his death, but I didn't really feel that attachment to him. I felt like he was not really present throughout the book. Like he was present in some very strategic moments, but not as a character. So when he died, I was sad, but I wasn't as sad as I used to be. Hashtag remember Cedric. The last thing I want to mention about this book has to do with the structure. This book has a considerably long climax that spans over 4 chapters and almost 100 pages. And after that, J.K. Rowling wrote 3 more chapters of denouement, closure, and conclusion. Therefore, the end comes naturally and it feels perfect. The book ends on a perfect note. Joe Rowling, why didn't you do the same with book 7? I don't understand. Book 7 just ends. It feels too rushed in my opinion. And why did you do that, considering that you could do conclusions so well? My conclusion of this reread of Goblet of Fire: this book is still amazing. It still is one of my favorite books. It's still a book that I will reread many more times. And I am just so hungry for The Order of the Phoenix, which I will proceed to start reading right now. Thanks for watching. See you in the comments down below.